Seattle News Weekly from Fox 13.
Hello, everyone. On this Thursday, it's another podcast that drops on Thursday mornings for you all. And I am with Sandeep Kaushik, our Fox 13 political analyst. I wanted to bring him in because, hey, this week the big topic is the elections or general election that happened Tuesday night. So we want to unpack a lot of things. Sandeep, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot this week, huh?
We have. It's a busy week.
How are you feeling about everything? Because this is kind of like your Super Bowl, if you think about it, right? You're a political consultant, but also, again, you're Fox 13 analyst for us this year. So are you waking up every morning looking at, hey, what's going to happen?
Absolutely. Yes. From the moment I'm up till the moment I go to sleep, my phone is like text after text. People are like, what do you think of this drop? Or what happened here? Or, oh, look at this race over here. What's going to, that's all we're doing right now.
They want to get your insight.
Especially because we do vote by mail, so we don't know the outcomes of a bunch of races. So there's all this analysis and number crunching and speculation going on about what's going to happen and what just happened with this drop and who's winning and who's up and who's down. That's what this time of the week is all about, right?
And I'd mentioned this to you too. I said, hey, Tuesday night, New Yorkers knew who their mayor was maybe an hour or two into that night. But the way our process is, and I'm not trying to be negative about our process, but just the way it's built right now with all these like mail-in ballots and all this stuff and the ballot drop boxes. We still don't know. It's Tuesday morning at around 11 o'clock when we're talking right now. We do expect, Thursday. I don't even know what day it is. It's Thursday morning.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So Tuesday night was the election. We still don't know 2 days later. We do expect a batch of numbers to come in around 4:15 Thursday, again, in several hours from now. So by the time this podcast drops, and a lot of people may be like listening to this, just bear with us. We don't know the latest Thursday evening batch results. However, we can still talk about this mayor's race because some people might say, hey, Sandeep, explain to me why with an 8% gap, Mayor Bruce Harrell has an 8% gap leading Katie Wilson right now. But why should he still be nervous? Because some people would say, hey, that sounds like a comfortable lead.
It does seem like a big lead, right? You're 8 points up, and, we're already had 2 big ballot drops have been counted already. We're probably about halfway through the count. He's up 8 points. So why wouldn't that kind of cement the deal here?
Yeah.
And let me just give you a really quick history lesson,
Please.
Right? In the last 3 mayoral races in Seattle, 2013, 2017, 2021, the more moderate candidate like Bruce Harrell, their election night numbers, the shift from that to the final count at the very end, it has been, in the first one, 9 points left. In the second, in 2017, it was 10 points left. And in 2021, it was 12 points left.
Wow, 12 points.
So the mayor was up 7 points on election night. That means that lead in all of the last 3 mayoral elections would have not been enough for him to emerge victorious at the end. So that's why everybody's kind of waiting on pins and needles to see. We're expecting a big shift left. Now, if the historical pattern holds, you'd say Katie Wilson is, even though she's behind 8 points, is still favored to win this race. Now, maybe, history won't turn out to be exactly the same this time, right? And so we really don't know. It is too close to call. We are on a knife's edge, and it's going to be close either way.
So say that the numbers still go in Mayor Harrell's favor when the Thursday night numbers come in. Say that he still leads by 8 or he ups it even more a little bit. Yeah. At that point, do you think he's in a better shape just because a lot of the votes have been at that point in?
If that's what happened, it's game over. If this afternoon count comes in and the mayor actually is still in the ballots that we count today, if he's ahead of her in those ballots, there's no way she's going to be able to catch up to him. So that would pretty much seal the deal. But what she really needs to be is getting something like 54% of the count of the ballots that we will see that remain to be counted through the rest of the election for her to catch up and win. So that's where she needs to be today, right? We're going to get a big batch of ballots. There's not, we're already halfway through. She needs to start catching up now if she wants to have a chance of winning. So if she's not at 53, 54, somewhere above 50 in today's count, then it's game over. Now, if she is there, it's game on, right? Then
and we still have to wait
we have to
until
wait
what?
for Friday,
Monday,
potentially Monday. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
This is
It
taking
could be
too
close
long.
enough that it won't be till next week.
Right. I want to move away from the mayor's race for a second and talk about the bigger picture in Olympia, the state legislature.
Yeah.
We had two crucial races where Republicans really wanted to get their people in there. You had Legislative District 6, and then you had Legislative District 5, both Senate.
26 and 5.
26 and 5, excuse me.
Yeah.
They're both Senate positions.
Yeah.
You had Caldera, the Republican, and then Magandance, the Republican, in those respective seats that were trying to get those seats. It does not look like at this point that they're going to pull it off. So I feel comfortable at least talking about those numbers a little bit more because those are a little bit more concrete. Tell me this, though, because with a supermajority, not a supermajority, almost a supermajority, let me be clear. The Democrats still have a lot of power in the legislative body. And then also, of course, Governor Ferguson is a Democrat. So you've got the branches all controlled by the Democrats. So tell me, what is your prediction for 2026? What are we going to talk about? What can Washingtonians expect from their legislative body?
Yeah. Well, if you look back at the last legislative session in 2025, it was a pretty bumpy ride, right? New governor, Governor Ferguson coming in, and he wanted to kind of set a different tone in Olympia than had existed under Jay Inslee for the previous 12 years. And he came right out with his sort of state of the state speech, coming out with a more bipartisan kind of approach to how he wanted to govern, and very quickly ran into, Hannah, as you were saying, the Democratic almost supermajorities. And not only do the Democrats have big majorities, but the caucuses have become increasingly progressive as time has gone on. So more and more moderates, really on both sides of the aisle, have kind of left Olympia. So the Republicans that are left are very, very right-wing. And the Democrats have gotten increasingly progressive. So even though he's a Democratic governor, he ran into a lot of conflict with his own Democratic caucuses. And the big issue last session was taxes. How far to go to fill, how much were they going to cut, and how much were they going to fill the budget hole they faced with new taxes. Progressives wanted up to $21 billion in new taxes. They wanted a wealth tax. They wanted, which is no other state in the country does. The governor said no to a bunch of that stuff. It caused friction. And they ended up doing the biggest tax increase in state history, $9.2 billion, more than $9 billion. But a lot of progressives still felt very dissatisfied, whereas on the moderate side, I think a lot of folks were like, you're raising taxes more than we're comfortable with. So anyway, that became the big point of friction in the last session. And guess what? I think it's coming back in this next session.
Oh, boy.
So if you had asked me this a couple of months ago, I would have told you, look, it's a short session, right? We have, in our system, we alternate between longer sessions, the 3-month sessions, and shorter ones. And this is a short session year. It's also an election year where almost all of those legislative seats are up on the ballot. So the legislators are thinking about their reelections as they're going into this. So I would have told you 3 months ago, I'm hearing they're not going to push for big new tax increases. There are not going to be any big moves. Let's kind of have a calmer, smoother session, so that we can get out there and get over to our election stuff and get ourselves reelected. That's not what I'm hearing now. What I'm hearing now is that there continues to be budget shortfalls, and progressives in Olympia are saying, we don't want an all cuts, supplemental budget. I do think that's probably what the governor is going to propose coming out of the gate. But the progressives I'm talking to are saying,
What are you saying? You think Governor Ferguson is going to propose an all cuts
I've heard
budget?
that.
Because he said that before, and he went back and he approved a $9 billion tax package. So, Republicans were saying, we don't have any
The
faith
budget
in him.
he was dealing with last session, just to be super clear about it in terms of Governor Ferguson, was actually proposed by Governor Inslee on his way out the door. But Governor Ferguson, as soon as he came in, said, I don't want to do big tax increases, right?
It almost sounded like he did an
about-face. By the end
of
the session, he did sign off on increases. So I'm hearing a lot of chatter. There are conversations going on between Democratic leadership and the governor. So I don't know exactly what the governor is going to propose. A month ago, I would have said, I feel pretty confident he's going to propose a budget that doesn't have big tax increases. And now I'm not as sure. But what I do know is that there is an internal conversation going on among Olympia Democrats about whether to try to go big on doing tax increases, including this kind of really surprises me, but there is active conversation about the potential for a high earners income tax proposal that might move forward in this legislative session. Some of the progressive Democrats and particularly some of the Senate leaders I'm hearing are actively talking, trying to convince the governor, no, we should do this, a high earners income tax. It'll be popular. We can and we can raise a bunch of revenue. And this would be a tax on incomes above $1 million. So it's only going to affect the very, very wealthy folks. And they're saying, hey, that's going to be popular with most voters. And now look, an income tax is ostensibly unconstitutional in Washington state.
And that's what I was going to ask you. How do they bypass that? Because we just had last year, you had Brian Haywood and his people. They passed that citizen initiative that cemented, it forced the legislature to say, okay, we're not going to pass an income tax. That was just last year. How do they come back now and say, oh, never mind, we're not, just joking. How do they do that? How do they convince people of
I
that?
think they're going to try to memory hole what they did last year, which is, yes, many Democrats, because they didn't want that initiative to be on the ballot because they thought it would drive conservative turnout. And there were a bunch of other Haywood initiatives that I was very actively involved as a consultant in trying to defeat. And so I very much thought it was a good idea at the time. Just pass the Haywood initiative. No one's doing an income tax in Washington state. It's not happening anytime in the foreseeable future. So why allow them to kind of use this messaging initiative to get on the ballot and maybe sink other stuff that is really more important? So they did pass that. But look, it's a year later, and Democrats are feeling pretty good. And one of the things we were just talking about, those legislative races, right, where a whole bunch of money poured in on the Republican side, including from the business community, to try to send a message to Olympia that we didn't like your $9 billion tax increase. Well, it looks like that effort is failing, and these Democrats are getting reelected. So if you're a progressive in Olympia, you're saying, hey, we passed $9 billion of taxes, and the voters aren't, unhappy with us over it. They're reelecting our colleagues. And
you bring up a good point, because you're right in the sense that businesses can, say until they're blue in the face, and they do, because they're saying that, hey, Washington state, I've heard from many business owners since the tax package went out. Many of them are going out of business and they're not liking this, and it might have major impacts. They might walk with their foot. But at the same time, they might be campaigning against it, and they're saying all of this, but it doesn't sound like Washingtonian voters. It's not resonating with them, because if it was, they wouldn't have voted the way I believe they did this time around, because if they had 2 Republican seats that could have maybe curbed taxes, right? If they're paying attention to they would have voted perhaps the other way.
That's what those 2 campaigns in 26 and 5
but they didn't. So that kind of tells me that, okay, well, maybe, obviously Republicans are in way trouble in this state, but not only that, but it sounds like to me that people can't vote one way, and then later on when they see votes come out, they can't really complain in some ways, right?
I think that's, it's true. Republicans have been sidelined in Olympia. They're kind of out of the picture. And so the real fights in Olympia are happening within the Democratic Party, right?
Democrat on Democrat.
Yes, between the more progressive Democrats and the more kind of centrist or moderate Democrats, or maybe. But if you're a progressive Democrat in Olympia right now, you're saying we're not getting any kind of signal from voters that they feel like we're off on the wrong track when we're proposing this. So they're like, maybe things have changed. It used to be, look, it's been a truism of Washington state politics ever since I've been here for the more than 20 years, going back longer, that an income tax is a political third rail in Washington state politics. Like, you propose that at your own peril, right?
At your own peril. But now they've got the courage, because they're saying the world is our oyster. Progressive Democrats believe that.
Yeah, maybe things have changed now. Look, I did the last income tax campaign, the 2010 initiative 1098.
So do you support the income tax? If you did the campaign, it's interesting that you say that, because you lobbied for it.
Yeah.
But here you are, that's like now saying what?
Well, no, look, I think in theory, yes, I think we could have a better, more balanced tax code. Look, if I did a high earners income tax, I would use the money to offset other taxes that fall on lower income and middle class folks. We have a very high sales tax in this state.
So are they going to lower the sales tax? How are people going to, justify that?
We will see what they propose, but there's progressives have a lot of public sector funding priorities they want. So there's always hunger for more revenue to do stuff. A lot of it is good stuff that I support. But you do have to ask, are they playing with fire here a little bit, particularly around an income tax? And I'm sure, because I know what the polling was on 1098 when we did this back in 2010, that if you just ask voters, hey, what do you think about an income tax on very, very rich people, and we can use that money to fund our schools or to fund, healthcare or what have you, they're going to say pretty strongly in Washington State, we're a blue state, they're going to say yes. But the reason we lost that campaign, we didn't just lose, we got killed in that campaign back in 2010. I think we ended up at 36% statewide. The reason we did was the other side spent millions of dollars and said, if you give Olympia this authority to do this income tax on high earners, there's no guarantee that in a year or two, they're not going to lower the thresholds and you're going to be paying this tax pretty soon. And when voters heard that, they were like, yeah, we don't really trust Olympia not to take this. And they're saying it's only about these really, really rich people, but they're going to turn it on us, and I'm not going to like it, and so they voted against it, right?
So
and I think that problem still exists now.
Are the progressive Democrats thinking this is their strategy? So they pass, say hypothetically speaking, they go back, they pass the measure, they know it's against the Constitution, they're hoping that it will just go to the state Supreme Court.
They expect it to be a test case.
They hope that it's a test case, so that way they can overturn that.
We have a very liberal Supreme Court right now. Right. I think their assumption is that this court will overturn the precedent that now dates back to the 1930s. And to be fair to them, that precedent is a real outlier compared to all sorts of other states around the country where their legal systems have decided differently about an income tax and said that it's constitutional. We are a little bit, that decision back in the 1930s does seem very, very different from what's happened in the decade since then in other places. So they have an argument to make to the court that, they got that decision wrong back then and you should reverse it. Right?
Interesting. So what's your prediction? Is 2026 the year of the income tax for Washington?
I remain skeptical that we'll actually see them go and do this, just because I'm an old school Democratic, political consultant. And
but you said that that's what they're talking about. And last year we were surprised about the $9 billion tax package. It was historically very high. So anything's possible, right?
I do think taxes are very much on the table, like whether they'll go all the way to an income tax, which is the most controversial tax they could possibly do, or whether they'll kind of find
a middle ground.
Other stuff that you can, maybe.
What's the other stuff then? What are we talking about?
It remains to be seen. They could. So 3 or 4 years ago, Washington State, and it was a 10-year effort to do this. Finally passed a capital gains tax, right? So it exempts retirement accounts, it exempts real estate, but nevertheless, it's a capital gains tax that falls on a very small number
stocks and bonds.
Profits made off the sale of stocks and bonds above. It was initially $250,000 in 1 year. They could turn the dials on the capital gains tax, right? There's just this last session, they did stuff around the B&O tax where they turned the dials up a little bit. You could go back there. There's any number of different ways. One of the things they passed last session that's now in the courts is this digital advertising tax that they passed.
So and that one, I talked to multiple business owners about that. A lot of people are shutting down because of that. Small businesses.
There's definitely been some pushback around it. It's in the courts now.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
Comcast, right?
Comcast. Brought a lawsuit.
Brought a lawsuit. So we'll see what happens there. So basically the theme I'm hearing from you is if they don't go drastic into the income tax, we're talking about just dialing up stuff that we already have. So the theme is just, hey, go after the wealthy again, right? Like, tax more of the wealthy.
Yes. I do think, particularly on the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, that is a very, very live conversation. And in fact, we're hearing it in the Seattle race, right? That we're waiting for the outcome of right now. Katie Wilson, who's a self-described socialist, has really said, she wants to fund a whole bunch of new efforts.
She's got a whole bunch of
ideas. She's got a long list of things she wants to do, and she says we're not taxing the wealthy enough. So what she wants to do is come in, pass progressive revenue, which really means, increasing taxes on more taxes, but particularly on the wealthy and on big businesses.
Big business, sure. But Mayor Harrell has said, hey, look, like she's promising, this is what he's been saying on the campaign. She's promising a whole lot. How's she going to pay for it? Right? Do you think that, I don't know, is that a good question?
Well, in Seattle, progressive taxation is popular. And you want to look at the mayor. He's the one who's actually backing the proposal that we just passed right now to raise the B&O tax in Seattle on larger businesses. So, and this is something I think that he got on board with once he realized that he was a little bit in trouble politically in the mayor's race. That there were some signs of it in the summer. That, oh, wait a minute, he's not just going to have a cakewalk. And so he was like, I know voters here are pretty progressive. Maybe I need to kind of
up the ante a little bit.
Up the ante and show that I'm pretty progressive too. And so he teamed up with the most left-leaning council member, Alexis Mercedes-Rink, to propose this B&O increase on larger businesses for him to say, look, you want bold progressive change? I can do that too.
Sure,
and so look, this is in the city of Seattle.
They love it.
1098, the income tax proposal that we got killed on statewide, we won in Seattle back in 2010, right? I mean, we won. If it's just the city, we would have won that race. So that's been a long-standing thing in Seattle where there's support for that. I just think when you translate that outside of Seattle, statewide, you start running into more resistance, and that's where
I feel like we're going to be talking more about this income tax in the future. But this is fascinating conversation.
It's going to be very interesting to see what they do. I mean, what people tell me is that internally the governor's resistant and been pushing back on them, but maybe not as much as he was last year, where I think he really took some hits when he got in such a big public food fight with some of his own party legislators. And so it's going to be very interesting. I think it's a very open question how this all plays out.
How do you think Governor Ferguson's been performing?
Well, look, I'm a fan of his. I've known him for years, from back in the days when, he was a kind of maverick Democrat on the King County Council, back when I worked for the King County Executive in the aughts. I think it's been a bumpy ride for him. Obviously, that first legislative session was tough, and I think he left kind of both sides or all sides of the divide kind of unhappy. Some people are like, "Why are you doing so many taxes? We think it's too much." The other side saying that's not enough. We wanted a wealth tax. We wanted more funding for all this stuff, and they did all these taxes, and yet they were still cutting a bunch of popular stuff too, right? Which raises the question about, what are your spending priorities, right?
Yeah.
What, are you funding sort of state employee contracts ahead
of
funding schools? And right.
I mean,
well,
it's the same old story.
I think it raises some questions about where their priorities are, and who's sort of who's first in line to get the money, and who's getting left behind, right? So those are all questions that I think are legitimate to ask about how we're deploying our resources in the state, and are we doing it in a way where we're getting maximum, benefit for our public dollars, right? That's a perennial question, and it's something that our politics is supposed to be about, and the public has every right to ask about.
So before we go, anything else you want to bring up that we haven't dived into today?
Well, let's see. Legislative races, obviously the city of Seattle race. It's, aside from the mayor's race and the other race that's still hanging in the balance, the other big one is the King County Executive's race. Though it's looking like Girmay Zahalai is. I mean,
he had the lead. He still has the lead, but again,
it's too close to call. He did gain in yesterday's ballot count, and so assuming if he gains in today's bigger drop of ballots that we're going to see this afternoon, he'll be in a pretty good place to think that he's going to win this race. But then I would say there were all these other Seattle races where the incumbent city council president is being
Sarah Nelson.
Yeah, Sarah Nelson is being defeated. Ann Davison, the city attorney, the first Republican that had been elected in Seattle in more than 40 years, she's going down to a big defeat right now. So we talked about this on Tuesday night. I mean, that Trump effect and pushing progressive voters in a more left kind of going back into
going more
back into an ideological bunker direction. That is very real, right? Yeah. We saw that nationally too. I mean, a good night for Democrats, right?
Oh, for sure.
For my team nationally, but yeah. Looking forward to the midterms, I think is going to be interesting because there's a roiling battle within the Democratic Party. That we were just talking about these kind of fights in Olympia between the governor. That's indicative of this larger battle within the Democratic Party about what does the party stand for, what direction is it going, How's it going to handle some of these hot button issues? You've got people like Mamdani getting elected in New York City. Open socialist Katie Wilson may very well win this mayor's race, also an open socialist. So that's one approach. Yeah. That's more tax the rich and all of that stuff. And then you've got a more kind of centrist approach. No, we got to figure out more incremental change and how do we get to where we're going. So that's the battle.
Yeah, that's the battle. All right, Sandy, fascinating stuff. Always love talking to you. Thank you for coming in today.
This was fun. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, don't forget new episodes of the Seattle News Weekly. It actually drops every Thursday, as we mentioned. You can watch them on the Fox Local app, fox13seattle.com, or, of course, on our YouTube channel. See you next Thursday.
Seattle News Weekly is available wherever you get your podcast.